Hello, Night Seekers, and welcome to Lacuna Noir. This is where forgotten stories and gentle voices meet, carrying you softly into peaceful sleep, wrapped in mystery. Before tonight's tale begins, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you're drawn to these quiet, shadowed nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story when darkness calls. Now, close your eyes, get comfortable, and let's drift into the unknown together. This story has always stayed with me, not because it was loud or violent or shocking in the moment, but because of how quiet it was, how completely ordinary it began, and how slowly the truth revealed itself years later. It happened about 25 years ago in my town, back when life still worked very differently. Before cell phones, before GPS, before you could track someone's location with a tap on a screen. Back then, when someone disappeared, they could truly vanish. It was the week of July 4th, peak vacation time. One of those weeks where everything feels lighter, where routines are broken up by plans and anticipation. A family packed up and headed to Myrtle Beach for summer vacation. The wife and their 3 kids left first, eager to get there, eager to start the trip. The husband stayed behind because of work. The plan was simple. He would finish up, then drive down a couple of days later and meet them there. There was nothing unusual about that. Families did that all the time. No tension, no arguments, no signs of trouble. Everything was normal. The wife and kids arrived at the beach, checked into their hotel, and settled in. The kids were excited. The weather was good. They swam, walked along the beach, laughed, made memories. From everything anyone ever said, it was a happy trip. They were just waiting for him to arrive. A couple of days later, the hotel phone rang. It was a message from him. He had called the hotel and left word that he was on his way, that he had finished work, that he was leaving and would see them in a few hours. It must have been a relief for her to hear that. The waiting was over. Soon he would walk through the hotel doors, tired from the drive, probably smiling, ready to join them. Only he never showed up. Hours passed, then more hours. She told herself he was probably running late. Traffic was bad. Maybe he stopped for food. Maybe he got turned around. This was before GPS, before real-time traffic updates. A long drive could take longer than expected. But night came, and still there was no sign of him. She tried calling home. No answer. She called his work. No one had seen him since he left. The uneasy feeling started to grow. That quiet dread that creeps in when something doesn't add up. Eventually, she called the police. At first, the response was not what she expected. The police suggested that maybe he had decided not to come, that maybe he had left with another woman, that maybe he had simply walked away from his life. It sounds cruel now, but back then, that assumption wasn't uncommon. Adults disappeared sometimes, and people often assumed there was a reason. But there was no evidence of that. No affair, no secret relationship, no suspicious behavior at work, no financial problems, no signs that he was unhappy or planning to leave. Everyone who knew him said the same thing. He loved his kids. He loved his family. He would never have just disappeared. Still, days passed, then weeks. No calls, no sightings, no trace. It was as if he had simply vanished somewhere between his house and Myrtle Beach. His family searched for years, not casually, but actively. They drove the route he would have taken again and again, scanning the sides of the road for anything unusual. They looked down embankments. They checked wooded areas. They followed every possible lead. They hoped for an accident because an accident would at least mean an answer. But there was nothing. No wreckage, no reports, no unidentified bodies, no clues. 10 years went by, a decade of not knowing. 10 years of birthdays, holidays, and milestones without him. 10 years of wondering what happened, of replaying that last phone call in her mind. She always said the same thing, that he had to have died somewhere, that he would never have left his kids, that as much as it hurt, she knew in her heart that he hadn't walked away. Then, one day, everything changed. A road in the county was scheduled to be widened. At the time of his disappearance, that area had been undeveloped. No houses, no businesses, just road, trees, and open land. As part of the project, a survey crew went out to mark lines and prepare the area. Another crew was checking nearby sections. That's when they noticed something strange. Far off the road, down in a ravine, they saw what looked like a car, not near the shoulder, not easily visible. It was deep enough and far enough away that you would never notice it while driving past, especially not at speed. Trees and brush had grown around it over the years, slowly hiding it from view. Some of the crew went down to investigate, assuming it would need to be removed before construction. When they reached it, they realized how old it was. Rusted, decayed, almost reclaimed by the land around it. Inside the front seat, they found a skeleton. Police were called immediately. The scene became quiet and serious in the way it always does when something long forgotten suddenly uncovered. The car was examined, the license plate was checked, and just like that, after 10 years, the mystery had a name. It was him, the missing man. The medical examiner ran tests and confirmed it. There was no doubt. The remains belonged to the husband and father who had left work one afternoon, called his family to say he was on his way, and then disappeared forever. Investigators reconstructed what likely happened. Based on the position of the car and the damage, it appeared that he had been traveling at a high rate of speed. For reasons no one could ever fully explain, his car left the road. There were no skid marks, no signs of braking. Nothing to suggest he had tried to correct or slow down. The car went airborne and flew off the roadway, clipped trees, and then crashed into the ravine below. Because of where it landed, and because the area was undeveloped at the time, no one saw it happen. No one heard it. No one reported it. From the road above, there was nothing visible. The trees and terrain swallowed the wreck completely, and so it stayed there. For 10 years. 10 years while traffic passed overhead. 10 years while seasons changed. 10 years while his family wondered and searched and grieved without answers. His car and his body lay hidden just out of sight, waiting for someone to stumble upon it by chance. When his wife finally learned the truth, it was devastating, but also in a painful way, validating. She had always said he must have died somewhere, that he would never have left his kids, and she was right. There was no betrayal, no secret life, no choice to walk away, just a tragic accident hidden by distance, time, and landscape. The sadness of the story lingers not because of mystery alone, but because of how easily it all could have been different. If cell phones had existed, he might have called for help. If GPS had existed, someone might have noticed his route ended abruptly. If the land had been developed earlier, someone might have seen the wreck, but none of that existed yet. Instead, a man trying to get to his family vanished without a trace, and the truth slept in a ravine for a decade. It's heartbreaking in a quiet way, the kind of sadness that doesn't scream. It just sits with you, a reminder of how fragile plans are, how thin the line is between arrival and disappearance, and how sometimes the world simply keeps moving, even when someone is lost right beneath it. In the end, there was an answer, but it came far too late to ease the years of wondering. And that, more than anything, is what makes the story so sad. In 7th grade, I remember having a substitute teacher one day, and like most kids, I didn't expect anything interesting to happen. Substitute days usually meant the class was easier, the teacher didn't really know our names, and everyone treated it like a free period. Most of the time, subs would hand out some worksheet or tell us to read quietly, and we'd spend the whole class whispering, laughing, and pretending to work. But this substitute was different. She didn't just sit behind the desk and let the class fall apart. She actually talked to us like we were real people, like she had been through things, like she had stories that weren't meant to entertain us, but to warn us. I still remember the way she looked before she started telling it, almost like she was deciding whether she should even bring it up. Then she told us something that made the entire room go quiet. She said that years earlier, before she became a substitute, she had worked as a full-time teacher at a middle school. She didn't say the exact name of the school, but she made it sound like it was a normal place, not some dangerous neighborhood, not some abandoned building in the middle of nowhere. Just a regular school where kids showed up every morning and parents assumed their children were safe. But one morning, something happened there that changed everything. She said one of her co-workers had gotten sick and had to call out for the day. It wasn't a planned absence. It wasn't something the school had time to prepare for. The teacher woke up feeling awful, probably feverish or vomiting, and had no choice but to stay home. So the school did what schools always do. They called in a substitute. At first, it seemed like a normal situation. One teacher missing, one substitute filling in. No one expected that day to be different from any other day. The students came in, walked to their classrooms, and the school moved forward like it always did. But the substitute they hired that day didn't care. The way our substitute teacher explained it, this wasn't the kind of sub who tried to keep things under control or take their job seriously. This was the kind of person who treated the whole thing like a paycheck. Someone who walked into the classroom, sat down, and let the kids do whatever they wanted. No rules, no structure, no effort. And the most important part was this. That substitute didn't even take attendance for first period. Not even the basic roll call. Just skipped it completely. When she told us that, some kids in my class laughed. Because to kids, that sounds like a dream. No attendance, no responsibility, no consequences. But our substitute teacher didn't laugh. Her face stayed serious, almost tight, like the memory still bothered her. Because she knew what happened next. That same morning, a boy was dropped off at school by his parents, just like any other kid. He got out of the car. He had his backpack. He probably said goodbye. Maybe his parents reminded him to have a good day. Maybe they told him they loved him. Maybe they were in a hurry, thinking about work, thinking about errands, thinking about the normal problems adults deal with. They watched him walk toward the school building, and that was the last time anyone ever saw him. He never even made it inside. Somewhere between the drop-off area and the front doors, he vanished. Just like that. No scream, no witnesses, no struggle anyone could remember. It was as if the ground had opened up and swallowed him. He was there one moment and gone the next. The substitute teacher told us that the most likely explanation was kidnapping. The theory was that someone had been waiting. Someone had watched the school in the mornings and knew how busy it was, how distracted everyone was, how easy it could be to grab someone if you moved quickly enough. And in those few seconds, those few steps between safety and the building, the boy was taken. It's a terrifying thought because of how fast it could happen. Parents assume that dropping a kid off at school is safe. Schools are supposed to be protected places. There are teachers, staff, other students, buses, cars, crowds. It feels like the last place someone could disappear. But that morning proved the opposite. It proved that even in a place surrounded by people, someone could still vanish if the timing was right. And the scariest part is how easily it might have been stopped. Because that boy would have been in the substitutes class. If the substitute had taken attendance, it would have been noticed almost immediately. The teacher would have read the boy's name. There would have been silence. Someone would have said he wasn't there. Someone would have mentioned they saw him get dropped off. The office would have been notified. Staff could have checked the hallways. Teachers could have been alerted. The doors could have been watched. The parking lot could have been searched. Police could have been called right away. And time matters in situations like that. The first few minutes are everything. If the school had realized within 10 minutes that a student was missing, the outcome might have been different. The kidnapper might not have had enough time to get far. Someone might have spotted a suspicious car. Someone might have remembered a face, a license plate, a direction. But that didn't happen. Because the substitute didn't care enough to do something as basic as calling out names. So instead, the morning went on like normal. Classes continued. Bells rang. Kids walked through hallways. Teachers taught lessons. The office staff handled paperwork. Lunch menus were probably being planned. Everything continued, completely unaware that a child was missing. And for nearly 3 hours, nobody knew. That's what makes the story so haunting. Not just that he disappeared, but that he disappeared quietly. That while he was likely being taken farther and farther away, the school was still operating like nothing was wrong. 3 hours is a lifetime in a kidnapping. In 3 hours, someone can cross county lines. Someone can reach highways. Someone can vanish into places where nobody will ever find them. By the time someone finally realized he was gone, it was already too late. Maybe another teacher noticed he wasn't in class. Maybe a friend asked where he was. Maybe the office called his name over the intercom. Maybe his parents called the school later in the morning asking why he hadn't come home for something. Whatever triggered it, it happened long after the moment when quick action could have mattered most. When the school finally understood the situation, panic spread fast. Teachers searched the halls. Staff checked bathrooms, closets, the gym, the library, anywhere a kid might hide. They checked outside. They searched the playground. They searched the parking lot. They probably called his name again and again, hoping he would suddenly appear, hoping it was just a misunderstanding. But he didn't. And then they had to accept the worst possibility. Police were called, reports were filed, people asked questions. The area around the school was searched, roads were checked, neighbors were questioned. But the investigation had a huge problem right from the start. The middle school didn't have security cameras. This was years ago, before cameras were installed everywhere. There was no footage of the parking lot, no footage of the front entrance, no footage of the sidewalks, and no footage showing whether he walked toward the door or whether someone approached him. There was nothing. No video evidence, no clear timeline, no confirmed moment of disappearance. It was like the boy had stepped into a blind spot in reality. The police did what they could, but without witnesses, without footage, and without an immediate response, the trail went cold quickly. Every hour that passed made the search harder. Every day that passed made it more hopeless. People kept looking, of course. Families don't stop looking. Schools don't forget. Towns don't forget. Posters went up. News reports aired. Rumors spread. Everyone wanted to know what happened, but no one had answers. The boy was never found. No body, no arrest, no confirmed suspects, no explanation that made sense. He simply vanished, and the world kept moving forward without him. The kind of disappearance that becomes a scar on a community. Something people whisper about for decades. Something parents bring up when they warn their kids not to wander too far. When our substitute teacher told us the story, she wasn't trying to scare us for fun. She wasn't trying to shock us like it was some ghost story. She was trying to show us how quickly life can change, how fragile safety can be, and how sometimes the worst tragedies happen, not because of evil alone, but because of negligence, because someone didn't do their job. That's what made the story so disturbing. The kidnapping itself is horrifying, but the fact that it might have been prevented, or at least responded to faster, is what makes it feel unbearable. It wasn't just bad luck. It was a chain of small failures. A substitute who didn't care. A system that didn't catch it immediately. A school without cameras. A delay that gave someone the time they needed to disappear. I remember sitting in that classroom, looking around at my classmates, realizing how quiet everyone had become. Even the kids who normally joked about everything weren't laughing, because suddenly, school didn't feel as safe as it had 5 minutes earlier. We were all thinking the same thing, even if nobody said it out loud. That could have been any of us. It could have been someone in our class, someone we knew, someone who had parents waiting at home, assuming their child was in school, safe and surrounded by adults. It could have been a normal morning, and then suddenly your name would be on a missing poster, your face printed out and taped to streetlights. And the thought that it all started with something as small as attendance made it even worse. Roll call is such a basic part of school. Teachers do it without thinking. Kids complain about it. It's routine. It's boring. But that story made it feel different. It made it feel like attendance wasn't just paperwork. It was a safety check. A way to confirm that everyone who was supposed to be there was actually there. After hearing that story, I never heard a teacher call out names the same way again. Every time I heard roll call, I thought about that boy. I thought about how his name was probably never called that morning. Or if it was, maybe nobody noticed the silence. Maybe nobody cared enough to ask questions. And somewhere out there, while the classroom carried on like normal, a child was being taken away from everything he knew. What happened to him after that is something no one can say for sure. That's the nightmare of missing persons cases. The mind fills the blank space with possibilities. Some people hope he was taken and raised somewhere else, alive, under a different name. Others fear the worst because the world is not kind to missing children. Either way, the truth is the same. He never came back. His parents dropped him off like any other day, expecting to see him later. And instead, they entered a kind of living hell that never ends. Because when someone dies, there is grief. But there is also closure. A funeral, a goodbye, a place to visit. A certainty even if it hurts. But when someone disappears, the grief is different. It's endless. It's waking up every day with the same question. It's imagining your child's last moments again and again. It's wondering if they were scared, if they were calling for you, if they thought you would come save them. It's blaming yourself for letting them out of the car. It's blaming the school. It's blaming the substitute. It's blaming the world. And it's never knowing. That school, that staff, and that substitute had to live with it too, especially the substitute who didn't take attendance. Maybe they didn't understand the importance of their job. Maybe they were lazy. Maybe they were careless. But that one decision became part of the story forever. And that is the scariest lesson in all of it. Sometimes the difference between safety and tragedy is not some dramatic moment. Sometimes it's something simple that someone didn't bother to do. A list of names, a check mark, a few seconds of attention. Because if the school had realized immediately, the police might have caught whoever did it. They might have stopped a car leaving the area. They might have found a witness. They might have saved that boy. But instead, 3 hours passed, and 3 hours was enough time for him to disappear forever. To this day, he has never been found. I was 10 years old when this happened. And even now, years later, it still feels unreal when I think back on it. Some memories fade with time, but this one never really did. It stayed sharp, almost frozen in place, like my mind refuses to let it soften. It took place in 2015 in Kumanovo, Macedonia, during what was supposed to be a happy day for my family. We were getting ready to celebrate my older brother's birthday. He was turning 14, and the house felt full of energy. There were decorations being set up, birthday lights hanging around, people moving back and forth, talking, laughing, planning the evening. It was one of those days where everything feels warm and normal. The kind of day you don't expect anything bad to touch. At that age, I didn't really think about danger. The world still felt mostly safe. My biggest concern was having fun, riding my bike, being with friends. So when some time passed and the party setup was mostly done, I went out bike riding with a friend. It felt harmless, just something to do while the adults were busy. We rode toward an area of the city called Divo Naselje. Even back then, I knew what kind of place it was. It was an area where most of the Albanian population lived, and it had the highest crime rate in the city. People talked about it in low voices. Parents warned kids to be careful there. But when you're 10, warnings feel distant, abstract. You don't really believe something bad will happen to you. We parked our bikes next to a small market. We were thirsty and wanted to buy some water. Everything felt normal. The store was open, people were inside shopping, the cashier was working like any other day. I remember stepping inside and feeling that brief relief you get from being out of the sun. Then everything exploded into chaos. Gunshots rang out from outside. Loud, sharp. So loud that my ears started ringing immediately. It felt like the sound cut straight through my head. Almost at the same time, police sirens filled the air. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows. The noise was overwhelming, confusing, impossible to process all at once. I froze. The cashier reacted instantly. She slammed down an alarm button, her face pale. People started screaming. My friend and I were terrified. We were sobbing, clinging to each other, not understanding what was happening, but knowing instinctively that something was very wrong. The workers rushed to secure the store. Heavy metal bars were pulled down over the entrance. The sound of them slamming shut echoed in my chest. It felt like being sealed inside a box. The outside world was suddenly cut off, replaced by panic and fear. They guided us into the storage room in the back of the market. It was small, cramped, filled with boxes and supplies. The door closed behind us, and the noise from outside became muffled but still terrifying. Gunshots continued. Sirens wailed. Somewhere nearby, people were screaming. Time stopped making sense. We sat there shaking, trying to breathe. I remember my chest hurting from how fast my heart was beating. My friend wouldn't stop crying, and I wasn't doing much better. The cashier tried to calm us down, telling us to stay quiet, to stay together, that everything would be okay. Her voice was shaky, but she was trying to be strong for us. Through a small gap in the storage room door, I could see flashes of movement. Ambulances rushed by. I saw people being loaded inside, some carried, some supported, all of them hurt. The sight didn't feel real, like something from a nightmare I hadn't woken up from yet. At one point, I heard a man screaming outside. His voice was raw, full of pain and terror. "I got shot. God have mercy." Those words burned into my memory. I gently closed the storage room door after hearing that, my hands shaking so badly I could barely control them. I didn't want to see any more. I didn't want to hear any more. I just wanted it to stop. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my mom calling. I answered, trying not to cry too loudly. She asked if I was okay. I told her where I was and what was happening. The moment she understood, she panicked. I could hear it in her voice, even though she was trying to sound calm. She told me to stay where I was, to stay calm, and to wait for the police. She said they would come and escort us out when it was safe. I said okay, even though nothing felt okay. Minutes passed. Then hours. The gunshots didn't stop quickly. They went on for hours. Long stretches of time where you would think it had ended, only for more shots to ring out again. Each one made me flinch. Each one made me think this was it, that something worse was about to happen. We stayed hidden in that storage room, barely moving. The air felt heavy, hot, stale. Fear does strange things to your mind when it lasts that long. At first, you're panicked. Then you're numb. Then the panic comes back even stronger. At one point, I honestly felt like I was losing my sanity. It felt endless, like the world outside had completely collapsed, and we were stuck in this small, dark room forever. I didn't know if we were going to make it out. I didn't know if the building would be hit. I didn't know if someone would break in. I was 10 years old, and I genuinely thought I might die there. I called my mom again. I called my brother. My voice was shaking as I told them that if I didn't come back, I loved them. Saying those words felt unreal, like something no child should ever have to say. But in that moment, it felt necessary, like I needed them to know, just in case. They tried to reassure me. They told me to stay strong. They told me help was coming. But fear doesn't listen to logic. It doesn't care about promises. It only cares about survival. We waited for about 15 hours. 15 hours of fear, of gunshots, of sirens, of waiting. Every minute stretched painfully long. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't rest. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't relax. I was trapped in a constant state of alert, listening for every sound. Eventually, the gunshots stopped. At first, we didn't believe it. Silence can be just as scary when you don't know what it means. We waited another hour just to be sure. The cashier told us not to rush, not to move until someone official came. Then finally, we were told it was safe to leave. We stepped outside slowly, blinking like we had come out of a cave. The street looked destroyed, empty, heavy with something dark. Not long after, a SWAT truck arrived. Armed officers helped us inside, their presence oddly calming. They spoke to us gently, telling us we were safe now. They escorted us back home. Now, when I walked through my front door, my family hugged me like they would never let go. My brother's birthday didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered except the fact that I was alive. That day left a mark on me. Even now, I remember it as childhood trauma. The sounds, the fear, the feeling of helplessness. It changed how I see the world. It took away that quiet sense of safety that kids usually have. It taught me, far too early, that violence can appear without warning, even in places you think you know. Later, I learned more about what had happened. It was a terrorist attack, known as the Kumanovo 2015 Divo Naselye attack. Seeing it described on a page felt strange, clean, distant, like it didn't fully capture what it felt like to live through it as a child hiding in a storage room, shaking and praying to make it home. I survived. But a part of me stayed in that market, in that storage room, listening to gunshots and wondering if I would ever see my family again. That part never fully left. A friend of mine used to ride his dirt bike out at a family-owned gravel pit. It wasn't some busy work site with trucks coming and going all day. Most of the time it was quiet, almost abandoned. The kind of place where you could go for hours and not see another person. Just open ground, piles of gravel, steep banks, and the sound of your own engine echoing off the walls. To him, it was the perfect place to ride. He'd go out there just to mess around, push himself, and do what dirt bike riders always do. He'd race up the slopes, slide down, kick up dust, and challenge himself to climb the steepest parts of the pit. It was like his own personal playground. No traffic, no rules, no one yelling at him to stop. And because it was family property, he felt safe there, comfortable, like nothing bad could happen. One day, he decided to try something bigger than usual. There was a huge pile of gravel, taller than most of the other mounds in the pit. The sides were steep and loose, like a slanted wall made of tiny rocks. From the bottom, it looked climbable if you hit it with enough speed. That was the whole thrill. If you could get the bike to the top without losing momentum, it felt like a victory. He backed up, lined himself up, and gunned it. The engine roared and the tires bit into the gravel. For a moment, it worked. He was climbing fast, bouncing slightly as the bike fought for traction. Gravel sprayed behind him like water, and he could feel the slope getting steeper the higher he went. But near the top, the gravel gave out. The back tire spun too hard, lost grip, and the bike jerked sideways. The front wheel lifted just enough to throw off his balance. In an instant, he was no longer in control. The bike tipped, and he fell off near the top of the pile. At first, it probably felt like a normal crash, the kind of wipeout riders laugh about later. But then the ground beneath him shifted. The gravel started moving. It wasn't just a little sliding. The entire slope began to collapse under its own weight. His bike had cut into the pile like a blade, and that was all it took. The gravel started pouring down like an avalanche, a massive wave of loose rock rushing downward, and he was right in the middle of it. He tried to move, but the gravel was already swallowing him. It covered his legs, his waist, his chest. The weight was crushing. Every second, it piled higher. His arms became pinned. His body was trapped like concrete was being poured over him. Within moments, he was buried. He couldn't breathe properly. Gravel pressed against his ribs and stomach, making it hard to expand his lungs. Panic hit instantly, raw and uncontrollable. He tried to scream, but his mouth filled with dust. He could feel the tiny stones pressing into his clothes, into his skin, and the more he struggled, the more he sank. That's when the true terror kicked in. Not the fear of being hurt, but the fear of being trapped alive with no one around. No one to hear him. No one to dig him out. Just him, buried in a silent gravel pit that almost nobody visited. He had a complete meltdown. And honestly, who wouldn't? His mind went into survival mode. He fought against the panic even though everything in him wanted to give up. He knew that if his face got covered, it was over. If gravel slid over his mouth and nose, he would suffocate right there, buried under a pile of rock, and no one would find him until it was too late. Somehow, through sheer adrenaline and desperation, he managed to move one arm. Just barely. It wasn't much. It wasn't enough to pull himself out. But it was enough to scrape gravel away from his face, enough to clear his mouth and nose so he could breathe. Every breath was dusty and painful, but it was air, and that was all that mattered. Once his face was clear, he forced himself to keep moving, inch by inch. He started digging, not with strength, but with stubbornness, pulling handfuls of gravel away, shifting his body little by little, creating just enough space to free his other arm. It took forever. Gravel is heavy, and it doesn't behave like dirt. It slides back into the holes you make. It collapses and shifts constantly. Every time he cleared a small space, more gravel would tumble down and fill it again. It was like fighting against the earth itself. But he kept going. Minute by minute, he dug himself out. First his shoulders, then his chest, then finally enough of his body that he could crawl. When he finally broke free and pulled himself onto the surface, he just lay there, gasping, covered in dust, shaking uncontrollably. He was alive. If he hadn't been able to move that one arm, he would have died right there, buried alive in a pile of gravel on land that belonged to his own family, a place he considered safe. That's what makes this story so terrifying. It wasn't some extreme stunt. It wasn't some dramatic disaster. It was a normal day, I doing something he had probably done 100 times before. And in one moment, the ground turned into a trap. After he told me about it, I couldn't stop thinking about how quiet that death would have been. No explosion, no crash loud enough for someone to notice. Just a person disappearing under gravel, suffocating while the world stayed silent. It's one of those stories that reminds you how quickly fun can turn into survival, how the smallest mistake in the wrong place can become deadly, and how sometimes the difference between life and death is as simple as being able to move one arm. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. When I think about this, it still feels unreal, like something that shouldn't be connected to my everyday life at all. It didn't happen far away, or in some story I heard secondhand years later. It happened in my own building, a place I walk through almost every day, a place that's supposed to feel familiar and safe. And the worst part is how normal everything around it felt, before and after. A couple of years ago, there was a couple living in the building. Everyone knew them, at least in passing. They were junkies. That wasn't a secret. You could tell just by looking at them, by the way they moved, the way they talked, the way their lives seemed to revolve around getting high. In a lot of places, people like that become background noise. You notice them, but you don't really look at them. You tell yourself it's not your business, that as long as they aren't bothering you directly, you can just coexist. They had a son. That alone should have made people pay closer attention. But it didn't. Kids exist in all kinds of bad situations, and unless something obvious happens, the world keeps moving. I don't even remember hearing the kid cry. I don't remember seeing him running around or playing in the hallways. Looking back now, that silence feels heavy. What they did to him is something that still makes my stomach turn. They put him in a dog crate. Not as a joke. Not for a moment. They put him inside a dog crate and covered it with blankets. They trapped him in a small, enclosed space, cut off the air, and left him there. A child, locked up like an animal, unable to move, unable to breathe properly, probably terrified and confused. not understanding why the people who were supposed to protect him were doing this. He suffocated. That's not a quick death. That's not something that happens instantly. It's panic. It's fear. It's the body fighting for air that isn't there. It's a slow, horrible way to die, especially for a child who doesn't even understand what's happening or why. And that still wasn't the end of it. After he was dead, they didn't call anyone. They didn't ask for help. They didn't confess. They didn't break down in panic or guilt, at least not in a way that mattered. They covered the dog crate with cement. They sealed their son's body inside it, like they were trying to erase what they had done, like if they made it solid enough, heavy enough, it would disappear. Then they took that cement-covered crate and put it in a storage unit. They hid him away like he was trash, like he was something to be stored and forgotten. For a while, no one knew. Life in the building continued. People came and went. Doors opened and closed. Elevators went up and down. Conversations happened in hallways. Laughter, arguments, music, silence, all of it happening just feet away from where a child's body had once been. And later, from the people responsible for his death. Eventually, someone found out because of the storage unit. I don't know all the details of how it came to light, but it did. And when it did, everything cracked open. The truth came out, ugly and undeniable. The idea that this could happen so close to me, in a building I live in, messed with my head in ways I still haven't fully sorted out. It's one thing to hear about crimes on the news. It's another to realize that something this horrific happened in your immediate environment, carried out by people you've probably passed in the hallway. What makes it even worse is that this wasn't even the only murder connected to that building since I've lived there. That sentence still feels wrong to write. Not the only one. There's something deeply unsettling about realizing that a place you call home has this kind of history soaked into it. That walls you lean against, floors you walk on, units you pass by every day have been part of stories like this. Stories that don't get erased just because time moves forward. And then there's the part that really messes with me. I usually end up smoking with the ones who did it. That's the part that feels the hardest to sit with, even in my own head. These aren't abstract villains locked away forever, existing only as headlines or court records. These are people who are still around, people who exist in my orbit, people I've shared space with in a way that feels casual, almost normal, even though it shouldn't. There's a disconnect there that's hard to explain to anyone who hasn't lived something like this. On one level, you know exactly what they did. You know the facts. You know how horrific it was. On another level, day-to-day life doesn't always give you room to fully process that kind of knowledge. People don't walk around wearing signs that say what they're capable of. They laugh. They talk. They complain about the same things everyone else does. And your brain struggles to reconcile those two realities. How do you sit next to someone, pass them a lighter, share a smoke, knowing that they locked their own child in a crate and let him die? How do you exist in the same space without constantly feeling like the ground under you isn't solid anymore? I don't think there's a clean answer to that. Part of it is survival. Part of it is the way environments like that force you to normalize things you shouldn't have to. When you live somewhere rough, with crime and addiction and violence as part of the background, your mind adapts in ways that aren't always healthy, but are necessary just to function. Still, it sticks with me. Sometimes I'll be sitting there, and the thought will just hit me out of nowhere. I'll look at someone's face and suddenly remember what they did, and there's this wave of cold that runs through me. Not panic exactly, but something close. A reminder that the person in front of me isn't just who they appear to be in that moment. It also makes you think about how invisible suffering can be. That kid was there the whole time, living, breathing, trapped in a situation he had no control over. And no one stepped in. No one noticed enough to stop it. Maybe people suspected something. Maybe they ignored their instincts. Maybe they didn't want to get involved. Whatever the reason, the end result is the same. A child died alone. That realization has a way of changing how you look at the world. It makes you more aware of small signs, small details. It makes you question how many other things are happening behind closed doors that never come to light. How many people are suffering quietly while everyone else goes about their lives? It also messes with your sense of morality in a very personal way. You start asking yourself questions you never thought you'd have to ask. What would I have done if I had known? Would I have acted? Would I have been brave enough to step in? Or would I have told myself it wasn't my place, that I didn't know for sure, that someone else would handle it? Those questions don't have easy answers, and they don't let you off the hook either. Living with this knowledge doesn't feel dramatic most days. It feels heavy in a quiet way, like a low-level hum that never fully turns off. Some days it fades into the background. Other days it hits hard, especially when you think about the kid, about how short his life was, about how much fear he must have felt in those final moments. I think about how unfair it all was, how he never had a chance, how the people who were supposed to love him the most became the reason he died. That kind of betrayal cuts deeper than any random act of violence. And the fact that this wasn't the only murder connected to that building just adds another layer of dread. It makes you feel like you're living on top of a pile of stories that never fully rest, like the past is always there, just under the surface, waiting to remind you that things can go very wrong, very close to home. I don't know what the right reaction is to something like this. I don't know if there is one. All I know is that it changed the way I look at people, at places, at everyday interactions. It stripped away a lot of illusions about safety and normalcy. Now, when I walk through the building, I'm more aware of everything. The silence behind doors, the sounds that carry through walls, the people I pass. I don't assume anymore that just because something looks ordinary, it is. This story doesn't end with closure. There's no neat lesson that makes it feel okay. A child died a horrible death, and that can never be undone. The fact that life continues afterward doesn't make it less tragic. It just makes it more unsettling. What stays with me the most is how close horror can be without announcing itself. How it can exist right next to you, woven into your daily routine, unnoticed until it's too late. And how once you know, you can never unknow it. That knowledge doesn't leave you. It becomes part of how you move through the world. And sometimes, that's the hardest part of all. Being from Long Island, this story never felt distant to me. It wasn't just something I watched in a movie or read about online. It happened close to home, in a place that people still drive past, a place that later became famous for something that never should have been turned into entertainment in the first place. Long before haunted house movies and pop culture myths, there was a real family, living a real life, who met a horrifying end. In the early morning hours of November 13th, 1974, in Amityville, New York, something went terribly wrong inside a quiet suburban house. The family living there was the DeFeo family. On the outside, they looked ordinary. Parents, kids, a typical home in a typical neighborhood. Nothing about that house suggested it would become one of the most infamous crime scenes in American history. That morning, a 23-year-old man named Ronald Joseph DeFeo Jr., known to most people as Butch, ran into a nearby bar in a state of panic. He was shouting that his parents had been shot. People in the bar didn't question it. Why would they? He looked shaken, desperate, and terrified. A few people immediately followed him back to the house to help. When they entered the home, they found something almost impossible to comprehend. Ronald's parents were dead. So were his 4 siblings. 6 people in total, all shot inside their own home. The parents had been shot twice each. The 4 children, ranging in age from 9 to 18, had each been shot once. Their bodies were found in their beds, as if they had been sleeping, or at least lying down, when they were killed. The shock was immediate and overwhelming. Police arrived quickly, and the house became a crime scene. At first, Butch insisted he was innocent. He claimed that someone else had done this. He suggested it was a mob hit, a targeted execution, something external that had come into the house and destroyed his family while he was away. But almost immediately, things didn't add up. His stories changed. Small details shifted. Timelines didn't match. His behavior raised red flags. Investigators noticed inconsistencies that couldn't be ignored. As pressure mounted, Butch's version of events continued to evolve, becoming more confusing instead of clearer. Eventually, he confessed. But even that confession didn't bring clarity. Over time, Butch gave multiple versions of what happened that night, and none of them lined up cleanly with the physical evidence. One version claimed that his 18-year-old sister Dawn shot their father first. According to this story, his mother then shot the other children. Butch said that he then shot his mother, after which he struggled with Dawn for the rifle, and she was shot accidentally during that struggle. Another version claimed that Dawn and an unknown assailant killed the parents together. Then Dawn supposedly went on to shoot the other siblings. In that telling, another struggle over the gun occurred, resulting in Dawn being shot again. The problem with these stories is that none of them fully explain what investigators found in the house. All 6 victims were found lying face down in their beds. There were no signs of a struggle in most of the rooms. There was no evidence of gunshots waking the rest of the family and causing panic or movement through the house. Neighbors reported hearing nothing unusual during the night, despite the fact that a high-powered rifle had been used. The weapon itself was a .35 caliber Marlin 336C rifle, sometimes casually referred to as an air rifle by mistake, though it was a lever-action rifle capable of causing devastating damage. The noise alone should have woken people. Yet most of the victims appeared to have been shot where they lay. According to information often cited from public records and sources like Wikipedia, 2 of the victims were believed to have been awake when they were shot. Ronald's mother and his 13-year-old sister Allison showed signs that suggested they may not have been fully asleep at the time of their deaths. That detail alone adds another layer of horror. It suggests awareness, fear, the realization that something was wrong, possibly just moments before everything ended. But even that doesn't answer the biggest question. How did one person move through a house, shooting 6 people with a loud rifle, without alerting the others? How were all the bodies found in positions that suggested they never left their beds? How was there no clear sign of resistance, no attempt to flee, no defensive wounds consistent with a chaotic attack? Those questions have haunted the case for decades. Butch was ultimately convicted of 6 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to 6 life terms. He spent the rest of his life in prison. He maintained, in different ways and at different times, that he either didn't act alone or that the full truth had never come out. Over the years, countless theories emerged. Some suggested accomplices, some focused on family dynamics, abuse or mental illness. Others went even further, feeding into supernatural explanations that later became part of the Amityville mythos. What is undeniable is that the murders themselves were very real. The house later became famous after new owners moved in and claimed it was haunted. That story eventually inspired the film series known as the Amityville Horror. Those movies focused on paranormal terror, demonic forces, and ghostly explanations. But for many people, especially those familiar with the real case, that framing has always felt uncomfortable. The true horror didn't come from spirits or curses. It came from inside the house, from a human being. The real tragedy is often overshadowed by the legend. 6 people died violently, including 4 children. Their lives were reduced to footnotes in a story that became entertainment. The attention shifted from who they were to what the house supposedly became afterward. And meanwhile, the truth of what happened that night remains unresolved in the minds of many. Even though Butch confessed, many people still question whether he acted alone. There are those who believe his stories, flawed as they are, contain fragments of truth. Others believe he fabricated everything to deflect responsibility. There is no consensus, only theories layered on top of unanswered questions. In March, decades after the murders, Butch died at Albany Medical Center while still serving his sentence. With his death, any remaining chance of a definitive confession died with him. Whatever he truly knew, whatever he truly did, is now locked away forever. That's what makes this case so unsettling. It doesn't end cleanly. There's no final answer that ties everything together. Just a house, a family wiped out in their sleep, a survivor who became the convicted killer, and a trail of contradictions that never fully resolves. Being from Long Island, it's impossible not to feel a strange closeness to it. These aren't abstract locations. These are real streets, real towns, real neighborhoods. It's the unsettling realization that something so horrific didn't happen in some distant, unfamiliar place. It happened in a quiet suburban home, the kind people still live in every day. The Amityville story is often told as a ghost story, but the real horror is far more disturbing. It's about family, violence, deception, and the limits of what we can truly know about a crime, even when someone is convicted. No matter how many documentaries are made, no matter how many books are written, the same questions keep coming back. Why did it happen? What really happened inside that house? And was Butch truly alone that night? Those questions linger unanswered, long after the headlines faded, and long after the man at the center of it all is gone. Jim Jones was not someone who looked like a monster at first. That is what makes his story so disturbing. He didn't appear openly violent or cruel in the beginning. He presented himself as kind, caring, and deeply concerned about justice and equality. He spoke softly when he wanted to. He spoke passionately when it suited him. To many people, he looked like a man trying to make the world better. In reality, he was something far darker, hiding behind the image of a savior. He started what he called a church, but in truth, it was a cult built entirely around himself. He preached ideas that sounded good on the surface. He talked about racial equality, helping the poor, standing up for people who felt ignored or mistreated by society. This attracted a lot of followers, especially people who were already struggling, not people who wanted to belong somewhere, people who wanted to believe in something bigger than themselves. At first, being part of his group felt like being part of a family. Members were encouraged to see each other as equals. They shared meals, supported one another, and believed they were part of something important. Jim Jones positioned himself as the center of it all, not just as a leader, but as a spiritual guide. Over time, he began to claim that he had special powers, that he could heal people, that he could see the future, that he was chosen by God. Slowly, subtly, control started to replace care. Jones demanded loyalty, absolute loyalty. He discouraged his followers from trusting anyone outside the group. He told them the world was dangerous, corrupt, and out to get them. Governments were enemies. Critics were liars. Family members who questioned him were trying to pull them away from the truth. The more isolated his followers became, the more power he had over them. People began giving up their money, their homes, and their independence. They worked long hours for the group. They followed strict rules. Punishments were handed out to those who questioned him, sometimes publicly, sometimes brutally. But even then, many stayed. Fear mixed with belief is a powerful thing. Once you invest your entire life into something, admitting it was wrong can feel impossible. Eventually, Jones decided that even the United States was not safe enough. He claimed the government was coming for them, that their enemies were closing in. His solution was extreme. He moved nearly 1,000 of his followers from California to a remote jungle in Guyana, South America. The place was isolated, far from cities, far from help, far from any easy escape. He called it Jonestown. On paper, it was meant to be a utopia, a self-sufficient commune where everyone worked together, shared everything, and lived in peace. In reality, it was a prison hidden in the jungle. Armed guards watched over the area. People were exhausted from constant labor. Food was limited. Medical care was poor. Jones controlled information, communication, and movement. Letters were censored. Phone calls were monitored. Leaving was nearly impossible. Life in Jonestown was dominated by fear. Jones's mental state deteriorated further. He became paranoid, convinced that betrayal was everywhere. He held long meetings where he ranted for hours, often late into the night. Loudspeakers blasted his voice throughout the camp, leaving people no escape from his words. He talked constantly about enemies, about death, about the idea of revolutionary suicide. He framed dying not as something tragic, but as an act of protest, a way to deny their enemies victory. Many followers were terrified, but they were trapped. They were in a foreign country, surrounded by jungle with no money, no passports, and armed guards standing between them and freedom. Their children were there too, which made leaving even harder. Fear for their families kept many of them compliant. Eventually, concerns about Jonestown reached the outside world. Families of members who had stayed behind in the United States began demanding answers. Reports of abuse and imprisonment started to surface. This led to a U.S. congressman deciding to visit Jonestown to investigate what was really happening. When the congressman arrived, some people tried to act like everything was fine. They smiled, they sang, they followed orders. But not everyone could hide the truth. Quietly, some members slipped notes to the visitors, begging for help, asking to be taken away. This was exactly what Jones feared most. When the visitors prepared to leave, taking several defectors with them, Jones made his final decision. As the group headed to the airstrip, gunmen loyal to Jones attacked them. The congressman and several others were shot and killed. Any remaining chance of outside intervention died on that runway. Back at Jonestown, Jones gathered everyone together. What followed is one of the most horrifying moments in modern history. Jones told his followers that the attack meant the end had come. He claimed the government would arrive soon to torture their children and destroy everything they believed in. He told them there was only one way out. Not escape, not surrender, death. He ordered the poison to be prepared. Cyanide was mixed into a sweet drink. The taste was masked so it would go down easier. People were told it would be quick, peaceful, a final act of loyalty. Armed guards surrounded the gathering to make sure no one ran. The most terrifying part was what happened next. The children were given the poison first. Parents were forced to watch as their sons and daughters drank it, screamed, convulsed, and died. Mothers held dying babies in their arms. Fathers watched helplessly as their children collapsed. Any thought of resistance was crushed by shock, grief, and fear. Once their children were gone, many parents felt they had nothing left to live for. One by one, nearly everyone drank the poison. Some went willingly, still believing Jones's words. Others were coerced, threatened, or physically forced. The ground became covered with bodies, the air filled with cries, choking sounds, and silence that followed too quickly. In the end, more than 900 people were dead. Only a handful survived. Some hid. Some escaped into the jungle. Some were away from the main area at the time. They lived with the memory of that day for the rest of their lives. Jones himself did not drink the poison. He was found dead with a gunshot wound to the head. Whether he shot himself or someone else did it for him has never been fully confirmed. What is certain is that he did not face the same suffering he forced onto others. The aftermath shocked the world. Images of bodies lying together in the jungle were broadcast everywhere. People struggled to understand how something like this could happen, how so many could be convinced to die, how parents could be pushed to watch their children be poisoned, how a single man could wield that much power over so many lives. The phrase, drinking the Kool-Aid, entered public language, often used casually, without people truly understanding the horror behind it. It became shorthand for blind obedience, even though the real event was anything but simple or voluntary for many of the victims. This was not mass suicide in the way people often imagine it. It was manipulation, psychological abuse, fear, isolation, and control pushed to the absolute extreme. Jim Jones did not just kill people's bodies. He destroyed their sense of reality long before that day. He convinced them that the outside world was worse than death. He replaced their identities with devotion to him. By the time the end came, many no longer felt capable of choosing differently. What makes this story so disturbing is how ordinary it began. A church, a community, promises of equality and love. It didn't start with violence, it started with hope. And that is what makes it so dangerous. Even now, decades later, the story of Jonestown serves as a warning about unchecked power, about charismatic leaders, about how easily people can be manipulated when they are isolated and afraid, about how evil doesn't always look like cruelty at first. Sometimes it looks like comfort, like belonging, like salvation. Hundreds of men, women, and children lost their lives not because they wanted to die, but because they were trapped by a man who convinced them there was no other way. It is terrifying, it is disgusting, and it is a story that should never be forgotten. When I think back on that period of my life, it still makes my stomach tighten in a way I can't fully explain. At the time, it felt like just another frustrating work situation. The kind that happens all the time when you're trying to get by and do your job. Looking back now, it feels like I brushed right up against something truly dark, something that could have destroyed my life in ways I might not have survived. I had taken a road job, nothing unusual for the kind of work I was doing back then. These jobs often meant early mornings, long drives, and relying on other people to show up when they said they would. My BA had arranged for me to ride with a couple of other guys who were working the same site. The plan was simple. We were supposed to meet, carpool, and head out together. It was supposed to be smooth. It wasn't. They never showed up. I waited longer than I should have, checking my phone, watching the time tick by. At first, I figured they were just running late. Then it became obvious they weren't coming at all. By the time I realized I was on my own, I was already behind schedule. I had to scramble to get myself there, and by the time I arrived, I was late enough to draw attention. My BA was not happy. I remember the look, the tension in the air, that quiet but sharp disappointment that comes from someone who expected better. I was irritated, too. Irritated at the situation, irritated at the guys who hadn't shown, irritated at myself for trusting them. At the time, that was the extent of my anger. I thought the worst part of the day was already over. I had no idea how wrong I was. Later, the truth came out. The two guys I was supposed to meet that morning didn't just oversleep or forget. They deliberately skipped the job. Instead of showing up, they went off on a bender. Drinking, drugs, the kind of reckless spiral where bad decisions stack on top of each other until something irreversible happens. At some point during that binge, they kidnapped a woman. Even now, typing those words feels unreal. They assaulted her, brutally. Then they left her for dead in a ditch, bound with barbed wire. Not tied gently. Not restrained in a way that suggested panic or confusion. Barbed wire. The kind of thing that tears into flesh with every movement. The kind of thing you use when you don't care if someone lives or dies. They drove away and left her there. When I first heard that part, my mind refused to process it. It felt too extreme. I'd too evil to be connected to something as ordinary as a missed ride to work. These were guys I was supposed to sit next to in a car, make small talk with, complain about the job with. And instead, they had done something so violent, so cruel, that it felt like it belonged in a completely different world. But the most haunting part is that she didn't die. Against all odds, she survived. She managed to free herself from the barbed wire despite her injuries, despite the pain, despite the shock. She got up and walked to town, walked until she found help. That image alone is almost impossible to fully grasp. A woman who had just been assaulted, left bleeding in a ditch, forcing her body to keep going because stopping meant death. Her survival is the only reason those men were caught. They both ended up doing a long stretch in the state penitentiary. Long enough to mark their lives permanently. Long enough that everyone who knew what they did understood exactly why they were there. When I learned all of this, something shifted inside me. I started replaying that morning over and over in my head. The waiting, the frustration, the annoyance at being late, the anger I felt toward them for not showing up. Each detail became heavier with every new piece of information. If they had shown up that day, I would have been in that car. That thought is the one that still wakes me up sometimes. I wonder where they would have taken me. I wonder what they were like in those hours before things went completely off the rails. Were they already violent? Were they already talking about things that didn't sit right? And would I have noticed the warning signs? Or would I have been too focused on my own life, my own problems, to realize how dangerous the situation was becoming? And then there's the darker thought. What if I had tried to stop them? I like to believe I would have. I want to believe that if I had seen something wrong, I would have spoken up, stepped in, done something. But real life isn't a movie. Real violence is chaotic, fast, and terrifying. There's no guarantee I would have made it out of that situation alive. Sometimes I think that if I had been there, I might have ended up in that ditch too. That possibility is hard to sit with. It makes you realize how thin the line really is between a normal life and complete destruction. How sometimes it's not your choices that save you, but someone else's failure to show up. For a long time after that, I felt guilty about being angry that day. Guilty about being annoyed that I was late. Guilty about being pissed off at my BA, when in reality, that delay might have saved my life. It also changed the way I look at people. You never really know who someone is capable of becoming. These weren't strangers pulled from some dark alley. They were co-workers. People trusted enough to be part of a work crew. People I was expected to rely on. And yet, when given the opportunity, they chose violence of the worst kind. That realization messes with your sense of safety. It makes you question assumptions you didn't even know you were making. That the people around you are basically decent. That the worst thing that can happen on a workday is being late or getting chewed out by a supervisor. Sometimes the worst thing is much worse than that. I also think about the woman they attacked more than I probably should. Not in a morbid way, but in a human way. I think about her strengths, about what it must have taken to get up from that ditch and keep moving, about how close she came to dying and how differently her story could have ended. Her survival feels like a small miracle in a situation that was otherwise pure horror. And yet, even knowing that, I can't fully shake the anger. Anger at those men. Anger at how casually they threw someone's life away. Anger at how close I came to being connected to that crime in a way I never would have recovered from. Because even if I had survived, even if I had somehow escaped physical harm, being present during something like that would have destroyed me in other ways. There are things you don't come back from, things that follow you for the rest of your life. I think about how easily people say things like, wrong place, wrong time, without really understanding what that means. That day, I was in the wrong place, at the wrong time, waiting for the wrong people. And the only reason I didn't pay the price for it is because they didn't show up. That's a terrifying thing to accept. It taught me something I never wanted to learn. That sometimes survival has nothing to do with intelligence or preparation or strength. Sometimes it comes down to pure chance, to someone else making a different choice, to a delay, to a no-show. Even now, years later, I find myself thinking about that moment when I realized they weren't coming. How annoyed I felt, how insignificant it seemed, and how, without knowing it, that moment might have been the most important one of my life. I didn't end up in that car. I didn't end up in that ditch. And I didn't have to live the rest of my life carrying the weight of something I didn't choose but would never escape. That knowledge is heavy. It's humbling. And it's something I'll probably think about for as long as I'm here. Because sometimes the scariest stories aren't about what happened. They're about what almost did. This is one of those stories that feels almost impossible to fully wrap your head around, even when you know it's true. It doesn't start with something dramatic or violent on the surface. It starts with jealousy, control, and anger. The kind that grows quietly until it becomes something deadly. What makes it even harder to process is that I wasn't even born yet when it happened. I was still inside my mother, about 5 or 6 months into her pregnancy, completely unaware that my life was already hanging by a thread. My parents' relationship was not healthy. That's something I only fully understood much later in life. At the time of this story, my mom had gone to a rock concert with her sister. She had lied about it, probably because she knew how my dad would react. That alone tells you a lot. She didn't lie because she wanted to hurt him. She lied because she was scared. When my dad found out, something inside him snapped. He became so enraged that he decided he was going to kill her. Not threaten her, not scare her. Kill her. My mom went to my grandparents' house trying to get away from him. Instead of cooling off, my dad took things even further. He camped outside my grandpa's house with a shotgun in his lap. He stayed there for 3 days. 3 days sitting outside, armed, waiting. That's not impulsive anger. That's obsession. That's intent. My mom was trapped inside the house, terrified. She was pregnant with me, trying to survive, trying to think of a way out. Eventually, she waited until he fell asleep. Just long enough. She slipped out through the backyard and climbed into her bedroom through the window, hoping she could hide, hoping she could stay out of sight. But he woke up, and when he couldn't find her, he went to a payphone and called her. What he said still makes my blood run cold. He told her that if she didn't get into his truck, he would kill her grandparents. They were visiting for Christmas and were parked outside in a van. He knew exactly how to corner her emotionally. He knew that threatening her wasn't enough. He went straight for the people she loved most. My mom was hysterical. She was crying, shaking, terrified, but she believed him. She had no reason not to. He had already proven how far he was willing to go. So, in fear that her parents would be murdered, she did the only thing she felt she could do. She got into his truck. That decision saved her parents' lives, but it put her own life and mine directly in danger. He started driving, not aimlessly, and not out of anger, without direction. He knew exactly where he was going. He drove toward Riverside to an area near the 91 freeway eastbound. At the time, he was working construction there, installing large drainage pipes into the hillside. He knew the terrain. He knew the site. He knew where someone could disappear. He had already decided where he was going to bury her. And me? That part is what still messes with my head the most. This wasn't a moment of blind rage. This was planned. He had spent days thinking about it, sitting with a shotgun, waiting, driving toward a place he knew well, a place where he believed no one would ever find the bodies. My mom later said that during that drive, she was more scared than she had ever been in her life. She truly believed she was going to die. She believed I was going to die with her, before I ever had the chance to be born. She said he stayed deadly quiet. No yelling, no arguing, just silence. That kind of silence is far more terrifying than screaming. When they reached the construction site, something happened that changed everything. There was a security guard on duty. My dad tried to go back onto the work site, but the guard stopped him, calmly, firmly. He told him he could not go back inside while he was on duty and asked him to leave. There was no aggression, no argument, just a refusal, a simple boundary enforced by someone doing their job. That refusal saved our lives. My dad didn't push it. He turned the truck around. Whatever had been building inside him, whatever plan he had been moving toward, was interrupted just long enough for it to fall apart. He drove away from the site and dropped my mom off at a gas station near Green River Road and the 91 freeway. And that was it. She was alive. I was alive. She later said that even after he dropped her off, the fear didn't go away right away. Her body was still in survival mode. She was shaking, crying, trying to understand how she had just escaped something that should have killed her. Time passed. Life moved on, at least on the surface. I was born. I grew up. I didn't know this story for a long time. When I finally did learn it, it changed how I understood my own existence. Fast forward about 26 years. There were some extreme rainy days, the kind that soak the ground and destabilize everything underneath. Part of the hillside near that same stretch of the 91 freeway collapsed. A massive mudslide poured down onto the freeway, blocking all lanes of traffic. It was all over the news. Cars buried, roads shut down, chaos. When I saw that, something clicked in my mind. That was the spot. That was where he was going to bury us. That was the place he believed would never be disturbed and never be questioned. And suddenly, there it was, exposed by nature, sliding apart, revealing how unstable it always had been. That's when it really hit me. If he had killed her and buried her there, no one would have found our bodies. Not for a long time, maybe never. We would have been swallowed by that hillside, erased without a trace. Another missing woman, another unborn child, a mystery that no one could solve. The only reason that didn't happen is because of one security guard who did his job, one person who said no, one moment of refusal. That guard had no idea what he was preventing. He didn't know there was a pregnant woman in that truck. He didn't know a man had a plan to kill her and bury her in the ground he was guarding. He didn't know that by simply enforcing a rule, he was saving 2 lives. But he did, and because of that, I'm here. I think about that a lot, about how fragile life can be, about how close I came to never existing at all, about how the difference between life and death sometimes comes down to something so small it almost feels unfair. I also think about my mom, about the terror she lived through, about the strength it took to survive that moment, about the trauma she carried afterward. That kind of fear doesn't just disappear. It stays in your body, in your memory, in the way you move through the world. And I think about how violence doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like silence, like planning, like someone sitting patiently with a shotgun waiting. Most of all, I think about that security guard. I don't know his name. I don't know what his life was like. I don't know if he ever realized what he stopped that day. But I wish I could tell him thank you. Not in a casual way. Not lightly, but with the full weight of what his actions meant. Thank you for doing your job. Thank you for standing your ground. Thank you for saying no. Because of you, my mom lived. Because of you, I was born. Because of you, a plan to bury 2 bodies in a hillside never became reality. That knowledge stays with me. It humbles me. It reminds me that sometimes the most important moments in our lives happen before we even take our first breath, shaped by people we will never meet, making choices they may never fully understand. And every time I think about that mudslide, every time I see rain pouring down a hillside, I'm reminded of how close everything came to ending before it ever began. I'm alive because someone refused to look away. This story is one of those that sticks with you because of how openly wrong everything feels and how powerless someone can become when the people around them control the system that's supposed to protect them. It didn't happen in some big city with headlines and protests. It happened quietly, in rural Arkansas, in a place where connections matter more than truth and where justice can be bent if the right people want it bent. A woman and her husband moved into a home next to his cousins. On paper, it sounded simple. Family land, family agreements, the kind of thing people do all the time, especially in rural areas. Her husband had made a deal with his cousins that allowed him to get the property, and based on that agreement, they built their home there. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a place to settle down, a place that felt safe because it was close to family. That sense of safety didn't last long. Things started going bad almost immediately. Whatever the original agreement was, whatever promises had been made, they clearly didn't hold up in reality. The neighbors, the husband's cousins, were wealthy and well-connected. They had money, they had influence, and they made it clear very quickly that they did not want this couple there. The harassment began in ways that were easy to dismiss at first. Petty things, annoying things, but constant. Garbage left along the property line, old vehicles dumped and left to rot right where they knew it would cause the most stress. Visual reminders that they controlled the land, the space, the situation. It wasn't subtle. It was meant to intimidate. The couple tried to handle it the normal way. They complained. They contacted local authorities. They asked for help. But every time, nothing happened. No citations, no enforcement, no consequences. It became painfully obvious why. The cousins had connections with local law enforcement. People they knew, people who knew their families, people who were willing to look the other way. That kind of realization changes how you feel about everything. When you understand that the rules don't apply equally, that the people causing the problem are protected, you start to feel trapped. You can't fight back without making things worse. You can't move easily. You can't get help. You're stuck living next to people who are actively trying to push you out. The tension kept building. Then one day, everything crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The wife left the house for a short time on just a normal errand. Nothing unusual. While she was gone, her husband was shot in their driveway. By the time she came back, he was dead. There was no question in her mind who had done it. There was no mystery to her about motive or opportunity. The history was there. The threats, the harassment, the hostility. Everything pointed to the cousins. It was obvious to anyone willing to look honestly at the situation. But honesty wasn't what followed. Instead of investigating the neighbors, the local sheriff focused on her. From the very beginning, it felt wrong. He did not seriously pursue the cousins as suspects. He did not treat them like people who might have committed a violent crime. Instead, he turned his attention toward the widow, as if the crime could only make sense if she were responsible. He tried to pin the murder on her. He refused to properly investigate the cousins. He refused to cooperate with any effort that would allow the county to take over the case, which might have brought in outside eyes and reduced local influence. Everything stayed contained, controlled, quiet. For her, it was like falling into a nightmare after already losing her husband. She was grieving, traumatized, and suddenly being treated like a criminal. Every interaction with law enforcement felt hostile. Every question felt loaded. The assumption of her guilt hung over everything. At some point, she was pressured into taking a lie detector test. This is where things get even darker. Lie detector tests are often portrayed in movies and TV shows as definitive. Pass or fail. Truth or lie. But in reality, they are deeply flawed. They measure physical responses, not truth. Anxiety, fear, grief, confusion, trauma, all of these can cause reactions that are then interpreted however the examiner wants them to be. She was taken into a room alone with a lie detector technician who was determined to make her come off as guilty. Hours passed. She was isolated, questioned, pressured. She had just lost her husband in a violent way, and now she was being treated like a suspect who needed a break. That kind of environment is designed to break people down. If she had been someone without resources, without support, without legal knowledge, that might have been the end of her life as she knew it. A false narrative could have been built, a coerced statement, a manipulated test result, enough to justify an arrest, enough to put her in prison. The only reason that didn't happen is because of one thing. She worked for a lawyer. Her employer knew exactly how dangerous the situation was. He knew how lie detectors are used, how easily they can be manipulated, and how corrupt systems can destroy innocent people. He stepped in. He protected her. He made sure she wasn't railroaded into jail. But even with that protection, the damage was done. Her husband was dead. The people responsible were still free. The sheriff had made it clear he wasn't interested in pursuing the truth. And the case was never properly solved. To this day, the murder remains unsolved. Not because there were no suspects, not because there was no motive, but because the people who should have been investigated were shielded by money, influence, and connections. And the person who should have been protected was treated like the enemy. That is the part that is truly horrifying. Not just that a man was murdered, but that the system meant to deliver justice was actively used to protect the killers and threaten the victim's widow. That corruption wasn't hidden or subtle. It was blatant, obvious, almost careless in how confident it was. If she hadn't known a good lawyer, she would almost certainly be in prison right now. That thought alone should terrify anyone. It means that innocence isn't enough. Truth isn't enough. In some places, in some situations, the difference between freedom and prison comes down to who you know and whether you can afford proper legal protection. This story carries a lesson that people don't like to hear, but need to understand. Never agree to a lie detector test. They are not reliable. They are not scientific in the way people think they are. They are not admissible in many courts for a reason. They are closer to psychological pressure tools than truth machines. They can be manipulated by the examiner, influenced by the emotional state of the person being tested, and used to support whatever narrative law enforcement wants to push. They have been heavily discredited. And yet, they are still used, especially against people who don't know their rights, who are scared, grieving, or alone. This woman lived through every nightmare at once. She lost her husband. She lost her sense of safety. She lost faith in local law enforcement. And she very nearly lost her freedom, not because she did anything wrong, but because she lived next to the wrong people in a place where power mattered more than justice. What makes this story linger is how ordinary it started. A family deals, a piece of land, a home. It could have been anyone. And how quickly it turned into something deadly. There was no dramatic showdown. No public reckoning, just a quiet murder, a corrupted investigation, and a woman who survived only because she had access to the right legal help. The killers are still out there. The truth is still buried. And the system that failed her is still in place. That's not just sad. That's terrifying. I grew up in Sunderland, a shipping and industrial town in the north of England, and from a very young age I understood that the place carried a kind of quiet weight. It was in the buildings, the streets, the river, and especially in the stories that older people told. Sunderland had been hugely important during the Second World War. Shipyards, docks, factories, coal, transport. All of it mattered, and because it mattered, it made the town a target. From 1940 to 1943, Sunderland was repeatedly bombed by the German Luftwaffe. It wasn't talked about with drama or exaggeration in my family. It was spoken about plainly, almost carefully, like something fragile that had to be handled the right way. The worst raids came in June of 1943, and those nights left marks that never fully faded, especially for the people who lived through them as children. My grandmother was one of those children. She lived with her parents and her brothers and sisters in a small coal miner's cottage near the river, close to the docks, the kind of house that people might recognize from films like Billy Elliot. Narrow rows, attached houses, simple layouts, built for working families who didn't have much money but built their lives around hard work and routine. These houses were never meant to withstand bombs. They were meant to keep out rain and cold, nothing more. Their location made things worse. Being close to the river and docks meant they were directly in the firing line. When the bombers came in, that area was one of the first places to be hit. Everyone knew it. There was no illusion of safety. They didn't have an air raid shelter. There was no space for one, no money to build one. And even if they had wanted to, there simply wasn't a proper way to do it. Like many families, they had to make do with what they had. Their protection, such as it was, consisted of the dining table, a blanket, and my great-grandfather. When the air raid sirens went off at night, there was no question about what to do. Everyone moved quickly but quietly. Panic wasted energy, and energy mattered. My grandmother described how her mother would gather the children, how they would all squeeze into the same small space. The dining table would be pulled out and everyone would crawl underneath it. A blanket would be thrown over them, not because it would stop a bomb, but because it was the only thing that made it feel like they were hidden. My great-grandfather would get under the table last. He would pull his wife and children close and wrap his arms around them. That was it. That was the plan. There was nothing else to be done. My grandmother said the fear wasn't sharp at first. It was heavy. A deep, crushing dread that settled in your chest and stayed there. You could hear the planes before you ever saw or felt the bombs. The sound of engines overhead, droning, constant, impossible to ignore. That sound alone was enough to make your stomach turn, because you knew what came next. Then the bombs started falling. She said the ground shook like the world itself was breaking apart. The noise was overwhelming, explosions close enough to rattle the walls, to make dust fall from the ceiling, to make the table above them jump and scrape across the floor. Every blast felt like it might be the one that ended everything. There was nothing you could do about it. That was the worst part. You couldn't run. You couldn't fight. You couldn't hide properly. You just waited. You listened. You held on to the people next to you and hoped that luck, and nothing else, would decide your fate. She remembered the silence between explosions almost as clearly as the noise. Those moments where you held your breath, waiting to see if the next one would land closer, waiting to see if the house would still be standing, waiting to hear if anyone in the family screamed. My great-grandfather didn't say much during those nights. He focused on holding them. My grandmother said she could feel his heart racing through his chest. Even as a child, she understood that he was scared too. That realization stayed with her. The idea that the adults weren't safe either. That no one really was. Sometimes the raids lasted for hours. Lying under that table felt like an eternity. Time stopped making sense. Minutes stretched endlessly. Every sound felt magnified. A distant explosion could sound like it was right outside. A nearby one could feel like it was inside the room. When the all clear finally sounded, there was no cheering, no relief in the way you might expect. People emerged slowly, stiff and shaken. The fear didn't leave right away. You stepped outside carefully, as if the danger might still be waiting. And then you saw what had happened. Their house was still standing. By some miracle, it had not been hit directly. The walls were cracked, windows shattered, dust everywhere, but the structure remained. My grandmother's family survived those nights. She always acknowledged that luck played a huge role in that. But the next-door neighbors weren't as lucky. Their house, attached to my grandmother's, had taken a direct hit. So had others along the street. Whole sections were destroyed. Fires burned. You could smell smoke, dust, and something else that she never liked to describe in detail. The sounds of crying carried through the street, people calling out names, people searching for loved ones in the rubble. As a child, my grandmother didn't fully understand what she was seeing, but she understood enough. She knew that the people she had spoken to the day before were suddenly gone, that the houses she passed every day were now piles of broken brick and wood. Those images stayed with her for the rest of her life. She told me that even years later, long after the war ended, she couldn't hear loud bangs without flinching. Thunderstorms made her anxious. Fireworks were difficult. The sound of planes overhead still made her pause, even when she knew, logically, that there was no danger anymore. The terror of those nights never fully left her. What always struck me most when she talked about it was how calmly she told the story. There was no anger in her voice, no dramatic emphasis, just quiet remembrance, as if raising her voice would somehow invite those memories back too strongly. She never described herself as brave. She said she was just a child who did what she was told. She said the real bravery was in the parents, who had to make impossible choices, who had to pretend that a dining table and a blanket were enough, who had to hold their children and hope. Living on the riverside, near the docks, I meant they were always aware that another raid could come. Every night carried that possibility. There was no guarantee that yesterday's luck would repeat itself. Each siren felt like a fresh roll of the dice. And yet, life went on. In the daytime, people cleaned up what they could. They went to work if there was work to be done. Children still went to school when possible. Meals were cooked from whatever was available. People talked quietly about who had survived and who hadn't. Grief became part of the background, woven into everyday life. The war didn't just take lives, it took certainty. It took the idea that home was always safe. For my grandmother, home was the place where bombs fell around you while you waited under a table, hoping it wouldn't be your turn. Her family survived. That fact alone shaped generations after her. I exist because those bombs missed their house by inches instead of inches too few. The randomness of that is hard to accept. There was no logic to who lived and who died, just timing, position, luck. When I walk through Sunderland now, I sometimes think about those streets as they were then. About children hiding under tables, about parents listening to the sky, about houses that stood and houses that vanished. The town carries those memories quietly, but they are there. My grandmother's story taught me something important. Terror doesn't always look like panic or chaos. Sometimes it looks like silence under a table, a blanket pulled tight, and a father holding his family together while the world tries to tear itself apart above them. They were lucky, others weren't, and that knowledge, passed down through stories rather than scars, is something I carry with me. I was on my way home from school when this happened. And even now, years later, I can still remember the feeling of it like it was yesterday. It wasn't one of those dramatic moments where something explodes into chaos. It was quiet, normal on the outside. Just another day, just another ride home. And that's what made it so disturbing. Because something horrible slipped into an ordinary afternoon without warning. I was stuck in traffic, sitting inside an auto rickshaw. Anyone from India knows exactly what that feels like. The sides are open. You're basically exposed to everything around you. And when traffic is slow, you can hear every conversation, every horn, every little sound from the street. Cars creep forward inch by inch. Bikes squeeze through gaps that don't even look possible. And people talk like the entire road is their living room. I wasn't paying attention to anything at first. I was tired, probably thinking about homework or what I was going to eat when I got home. The usual stuff. I just wanted to get out of the heat and away from the noise. Then a motorcycle pulled up right beside the auto. 2 guys were on it. They didn't look particularly strange at first glance. Just 2 dudes on a bike, like you see everywhere. But they were talking to each other in low voices, leaning slightly inward, as if they didn't want anyone to hear them. The problem was, I was right there. In an auto, you're not separated by windows or doors. I was close enough that it honestly felt like I was sitting right next to them. The distance between us was nothing. A foot, maybe less. And because the traffic wasn't moving, neither were they. We were stuck side by side, trapped in the same slow, crawling moment. At first, I didn't even realize what they were saying. My brain caught a few words, but didn't connect them. Then one sentence landed clearly in my ears, and it felt like ice was poured down my spine. They were talking about dismembering a body. I remember blinking, thinking maybe I misheard. Maybe they were joking. Maybe it was something else. But as they kept talking, it became impossible to misunderstand. Their voices were calm, casual, like they were discussing groceries or a cricket match. There was no panic in their tone, no emotion, no hesitation. Just a matter-of-fact conversation. One of them said they would scoop the eyes out with a spoon. The words hit me so hard that I felt sick immediately. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe properly. My hands went cold. I stared straight ahead, pretending I wasn't listening, pretending I hadn't heard a thing, even though my entire body was screaming at me to get away. Then they started talking about cutting off arms. They mentioned other things too, but my mind couldn't hold on to all of it. It was like my brain refused to absorb every detail because it was too horrifying. I just remember fragments, enough to understand what kind of conversation I was hearing, and enough to know it wasn't a joke. They were talking about selling the body parts. That was the moment it truly sank in. This wasn't some sick exaggeration. This wasn't dark humor. These 2 men were calmly discussing something real, something they either had done before or were planning to do soon. The way they spoke sounded practiced, like they were going over steps, like it was normal. And the scariest part of all was what they hinted at next. I believe the body they were talking about was a kid. I don't know why I felt that, but I did. Maybe it was the way they spoke about it. Maybe it was the tone, the casual cruelty. Or maybe they actually said something that pointed toward it, and my brain locked onto that detail like a warning siren. A child. I remember feeling my stomach twist. My throat went dry. My heart was beating so loud that I thought they might hear it. I didn't dare turn my head toward them. I didn't dare make eye contact. In my mind, the smallest wrong move could make them notice me. And if they noticed me, then what? I was just a school kid in uniform, sitting in an auto, close enough to hear something I was never meant to hear. Traffic moved forward a little, then stopped again. The bike stayed beside us, creeping along at the same pace. It felt like it went on forever, even though it was probably only a few minutes. But in those minutes, my mind was racing through every possible outcome. Should I tell the auto driver? Should I get out and run? Should I call someone? Should I memorize their faces? Should I pretend I heard nothing? I didn't have a phone. Even if I did, what would I say? Who would believe me? And even if someone believed me, would it matter? Would the police do anything? Would they even find them in a city full of millions of people and endless motorcycles? I was trapped in that moment, helpless. The worst part was how normal everything around us still looked. People walking, vendors selling snacks, horns blaring. The usual chaos of an Indian street. Life was continuing like nothing was wrong. While right next to me, two men were talking about cutting up a body like it was a routine chore. Eventually, the traffic shifted, and their bikes squeezed forward into a gap between cars. They disappeared ahead, swallowed by the crowd. Just like that. Gone. Two men who might have been planning something horrific, blending back into the city like they had never existed. I remember sitting there afterwards, still frozen, still staring at the road. My mind felt numb. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel safe. I just felt dirty, like I had overheard something I wasn't supposed to know. When I finally reached home, everything looked normal. My street, my gate, my house, my family. It felt wrong that the world could look so peaceful after what I had just heard. I didn't even know how to explain it to anyone. I wasn't sure anyone would believe me. And even if they did, what could they do? For days after, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept replaying their words in my head. The spoon, the arms, the selling, the calmness. That part was what scared me the most. Not the violence itself, but how casually they discussed it. Like it was just business. And the thought that it could have been a kid made it even worse, because it meant someone out there might have been missing, someone's family might have been searching, and meanwhile, these two guys were sitting on a bike in traffic talking about what they were going to do with the body. Even now, I still think about it sometimes when I'm stuck in traffic. When a motorcycle pulls up beside me, when I hear people talking quietly. It's like that moment rewired something in my brain. Because before that day, I thought danger was something you could see coming. After that day, I realized something terrifying. Sometimes evil doesn't hide in dark alleys. Sometimes it sits right next to you in broad daylight, speaking softly, while the entire world moves around it like nothing is wrong. My fourth grade teacher told us this story one day, and even though I was just a kid at the time, it stayed with me far longer than most things adults ever said in class. It wasn't part of a lesson. There were no worksheets, no moral written on the board. She just told it quietly, like something she carried with her and felt needed to be shared. Years later, I still remember it clearly. And the older I get, the more disturbing it feels. Before she became my teacher, she had worked at another school somewhere in Georgia. She didn't say the exact town, just that it wasn't a good area and that the school struggled with violence, gangs, and kids getting pulled into things far bigger and darker than they could handle. At the time, I didn't really understand what that meant. Words like gang recruitment didn't fully register with me back then. Now they do. She said the school had a police officer assigned to it. Not a security guard, not a teacher monitoring the halls, but an actual police officer. That alone should tell you what kind of environment it was. Schools don't usually have full-time police unless there are serious concerns about safety. One day during lunch, she was in the cafeteria like she often was. Lunch was always loud, kids everywhere, talking, laughing, yelling across tables, trays clattering, chairs scraping the floor. Anyone who has been in a school cafeteria knows the sound. It's chaos, but it's a normal kind of chaos. The kind adults tune out because it happens every day. Nothing felt out of the ordinary at first. Then she noticed something shift in the room. She couldn't explain it perfectly, just that the energy changed. A group of kids stood up from their table and started moving together, not running, not shouting, just walking, focused, serious. That alone was strange because kids rarely move like that unless something is about to happen. One of those kids had been on the radar already. According to what she had been told later, he was being recruited into a gang. Not officially in yet, but being tested, watched, pressured. The kind of situation where a kid feels like they have to prove themselves no matter the cost. The gang wanted him to do something to show loyalty, something extreme. They approached the school police officer in the middle of the cafeteria. Not in the hallway, not after school, not somewhere hidden. Right there, in front of everyone, in the middle of lunch with dozens, maybe hundreds of students around. At first, it looked like an argument might be starting. Kids argue with school officers sometimes. Mouth off, talk back. Nothing new. But then it escalated instantly. The kid slammed the officer's head down onto one of the metal cafeteria tables. Those tables aren't forgiving. They're solid, heavy, cold, the kind designed to survive years of abuse from students. When his head hit the table, the sound cut through the cafeteria noise in a way my teacher said she would never forget. A sharp, dull crack that made people freeze. The officer went down, his head pinned against the table. Blood started pouring from his head almost immediately. Not a small cut, not a trickle. Enough blood that people nearby screamed and jumped back. Lunch trays crashed to the floor, chairs tipped over. The room erupted into chaos. For a moment, no one knew what to do. And teachers shouted, kids ran, some froze in place, too shocked to move. My teacher said her heart was pounding so hard, she thought she might pass out. This wasn't a fight between students. This was an attack on a police officer carried out by a child in front of an entire cafeteria. The kid didn't look scared in that moment. That part haunted her the most. According to her, he looked determined, almost blank. Like he had already crossed a line in his mind and there was no turning back. Like this was something he believed he had to do. The other kids who were part of the group didn't help the officer. They didn't pull the attacker away. They stood nearby, watching, making sure it happened. Making sure the message was sent. That's what made it even worse. It wasn't random violence. It was a performance, a test. Teachers rushed in to intervene, screaming for help, trying to get the kid off the officer. Someone called the police. Someone else locked doors. The cafeteria was in complete disarray. Kids were crying. Some were screaming. Others were silent, staring, trying to understand what they were seeing. Eventually, other officers arrived. The attacker was restrained and arrested. The other kids involved were taken away as well. The injured officer was treated right there and then taken for medical care. My teacher said she didn't believe the officer died, but the injuries were serious enough that no one knew in that moment how bad it really was. The rest of the day was a blur. School was essentially over, even if the bells rang later. Parents were called, kids were sent home early. Teachers tried to comfort students while processing their own shock. The cafeteria, a place meant for food and laughter, had turned into a crime scene in seconds. What made the story even more unsettling was the reason behind it. That kid wasn't acting out because he was angry at the officer personally. He wasn't defending himself. He wasn't reacting to something that just happened. He was trying to get into a gang, and killing or seriously injuring a school police officer was the task he had been given to prove himself. Think about that for a moment. A child sitting in class earlier that day, doing assignments, eating lunch with friends, was being pressured into committing murder in front of an entire school. Not because he wanted to, necessarily, but because he believed it was the only way to belong, to be protected, to survive in whatever environment he was living in. My teacher said that detail changed how she looked at kids forever. She said it taught her that sometimes the scariest violence doesn't come from adults with long criminal records. Sometimes it comes from children who have been pushed so far into hopelessness that they believe destroying someone else's life is the only path forward. She also talked about how helpless she felt in that moment. Teachers are trained to handle fights, arguments, disruptions. They're not trained to stop attempted murder. They're not trained to protect a police officer from a coordinated attack by students in the middle of lunch. And the kids who witnessed it, they carried that memory with them. You don't forget seeing a man bleeding from the head while adults scream and chaos breaks out. You don't forget the sound. You don't forget the fear. You don't forget realizing all at once that school's not always safe. Even though the officer survived, the damage was already done. That school changed after that. Security increased. Rules got stricter. The atmosphere became tense. Kids were watched more closely. Teachers were on edge. Trust was broken, not just between students and authority, but between students themselves. Because once something like that happens, you start wondering who else might be capable of it. Who else might be under pressure? Who else might be one bad day away from doing something irreversible? When my teacher finished telling us the story, the room was silent. A bunch of fourth graders sitting still, not whispering, not joking. We didn't fully understand gangs or recruitment or systemic violence. But we understood fear. We understood that something very wrong had happened in that cafeteria. Looking back now as an adult, the story feels even heavier. It wasn't just about one violent act. It was about how early kids can be pulled into cycles of violence, about how schools sometimes become battlegrounds for problems that start far outside their walls, about how adults are often reacting instead of preventing, because the roots of the problem run too deep. It also says something unsettling about how public spaces can turn dangerous without warning. A cafeteria full of people in the middle of the day should be one of the safest places imaginable, and yet violence still found its way in. That's what makes the story linger. Not the blood, not even the attack itself, but the idea that a child was willing to do that in front of everyone because he believed it was necessary. Because someone convinced him that this was the price of belonging. And the fact that dozens of other children had to watch it happen, powerless to stop it, carrying that image with them long after lunch was over. My teacher never told that story to scare us. She told it because she wanted us to understand something important. That the choices you make and the people you surround yourself with matter. That violence doesn't always look like monsters in dark alleys. Sometimes it looks like a kid your own age, standing up from a lunch table, walking calmly towards someone, and crossing a line that can never be uncrossed. Even now, when I think about school cafeterias, about the noise and the metal tables and the chaos of lunch, I sometimes think about that officer and that kid frozen in that moment. And I'm reminded how thin the line really is between normal and nightmare. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, just real stories about real people who survive things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can.